Now, let's go ahead and dive in. Section number 1, 4 key questions Google Analytics is built to answer. All right, first, before we dive into Google Analytics, we're going to talk about a big, giant framework. I think this is the number 1 mistake people make when it comes to analytics, is they jump into today.
I loved seeing this in your slides when I was looking at those yesterday. I was like, guys, starts with the word questions. I love that is the first point. Don't want to steal your thunder, but I just loved seeing
but you see this all the time, right? People jump into Google Analytics to kind of like see what they can see, and they treat Google Analytics kind of like an oracle, right? Like it's going to say, oh, well, this is what it's like, and here's the, you hack through your data long enough, you're going to find a jade monkey that's going to turn you into a supermarketer. It doesn't work like that, right? And there's always an article or blog post of somewhere that found the one thing that, blue t-shirts on a Friday, if you target those people, they tripled or, urban, right? Like it's the way you use analytics, the way you use any tool like this is you go into Google Analytics armed with something we call KIA. So you've already heard me talk about this. KIA stands for 3 things: question, information, action, in that order. So before you go into analytics, you think about, okay, what question am I trying to answer? And what information will I need to get those answers? And this is the most important part. What actions will I take based on those answers? And you sort of role play this in your head. And you go, well, if the report shows everything's above 10, then I'll do this. If it shows everything's below 10, then I'll do that. And you sort of have this little practice session with yourself before you go in. But now when you go into analytics, you're going in for a specific thing. You're going in to get a specific answer, to go find the report that's going to give a specific answer. And then you'll know what to do with that report. And all of a sudden, the thing becomes a lot easier to use. So just going in armed with KIA can help you tremendously get a little bit more usefulness out of this particular tool. Now, let's talk about 4 key questions, because every question that you ask, because that's half the battle too, is, you go into this, but then you don't want to poke around a million reports looking for the answers. You got to sort of at least have a general idea of where you need to go to find these answers. And fortunately, I think analytics does have a really good framework in how they built these things, which is 4 key categories. They're always, any question you ever ask is going to come into 4 key categories. We're going to cover them one at a time, and I'll talk about the reports as we go through each one. So the first is, who are my users? Okay, so anything that you're asking around the user themselves will be in this whole report section. I'm going to bring up analytics, which we all know and love at this point. So, and that's going to be in your audience reports. So anything in here is answering some version of who are the users. So in the case of demographics, it would be, okay, well, who are my users in terms of age and gender? And you sort of get age and gender data coming through. In terms of interest, well, when it comes to my users, what other things are they currently interested in buying? Maybe you're working on targeting and you're trying to figure out some targeting stuff. You can come through here and see interest segments coming through. And these are, in this case, the in-market segment is exactly answering that. What are the things they're interested in doing? Affinity is just other things that they're into, right? So if you're trying to get a little bit more lifestyle or build a psychographic profile for an avatar of some sort that you're targeting, that's where you can find some interesting information. Then, and actually what's really cool about these reports, and people, I think, even me for years, I sort of skip past this, but it's super useful to kind of go over here and you see, oh yeah, they're into employment, software, whatever else. But look over here. You can see, and these are people that purchased. So now I can start going, well, let me just see my transactions. I'll sort by transaction, thank you very much. And then I'll see, like, these are the ones I want to target, because you can see my buyers. Like, these are the ones who are likely to buy. And obviously, the bigger these numbers are, the more you can trust them. But this at least gives me an idea, right? So that I would want to maybe target somebody who doesn't bring in a lot of users, but they sure do seem to buy percentage-wise. So not bad. So that's sort of the main first thing around who the users are. Another important question before we go on is what devices are they using, right? So this is users' devices. You come into mobile, you go to overview, and there are devices there. So if you want to target mobile and desktop, you can actually see mobile and desktop. And again, what's cool about these reports is you see e-commerce details, but you also see goals that you've set up. You can see all that as well. So some really, really cool information that you can pull up just by asking, hey, who are my users? All right. So that's the first question. Who are my users? The second question, this is just some of the reports. There's a bunch of them back there. But again, if you're asking a question around, hey, I wonder what browser they're using, or what screen size, like you can get crazy detailed, where they live, right? What languages they speak, all of that stuff in that report, in the audience report. So that's all about who my users are. Now, if your question is more around traffic, which of course a lot of us are asking those questions, it's always about where are my users coming from? So cool. I know who they are. I know what devices they're using. I know what they're into. I know what their age groups are, all that fun stuff. I need to know where they're coming from. What traffic sources are they coming from? And of course, Google Analytics has your answer. Many of you probably already know this one, but this is the acquisition reports, right? The acquisition side of things. And we know this because as agencies, we're doing Google Ads traffic. And so Google Ads reports happen to be nestled right in there. So Google Ads obviously will tell you all about the Google Ads that are coming through and everything that's coming in from Google Ads. You have to connect it, of course, but then you can come through and dig deep into the campaigns that are coming through you've got set up and the results or non-results of the campaigns that you're pulling through. So lots of information are coming through Google Ads here. But there are also other things that I think you should take a look at and get used to seeing because you want to expand. Besides Google Ads, you want to be able to see the entire user journey as best you can, which means all different traffic sources. Yeah. And this is the first, your first glimpse of that in terms of understanding not only where visitors are coming from, but what the results of the visitors are. And that's where I go into all traffic. And technically, what my favorite report is the source medium report.
That is where I start every single new analytics journey. Like any new client, as soon as we get access, that's the first thing I look at, just to get a sense of the overall.
And it does a great job of talking about traffic, right? So, Source Media Report is fantastic for that. And we're going to come back and talk a lot more about this. So we won't go into great detail on the ins and outs of it, but you want this report to be able to be set up properly so that it just tells you a story, right? And there's a big difference between Google Analytics having a story to tell and Google Analytics telling you the story. And you want Google Analytics to tell you the story. Right.
That's a good distinction.
So, yeah, and that's why the setup's so important. So we'll continue to get into that as we go through this training. And of course, you've got things like Search Console coming in, so Google Search and other aspects as well. So again, we'll come back to this.
One quick question. Sure. I will save most of them to the Q&A, but this one's relevant. What's the line 5 there? The not set. Someone wants to know.
That would be, I would say that would need to be investigated. So I'm using Google Merchandise Store's demo account. This is the Google demo account. If I was Google, I would absolutely investigate that.
Yeah.
Because they've got some sort of error coming through where this is quite literally either somebody coded it to do that, which is unlikely, or Google has no idea. And normally no idea means direct none. There's some sort of error with UTMs coming through, something that's not being properly set. Probably some other UTM has a value, but these ones didn't. That's the only thing that would force that. Okay. So for example, in fact, I'm just going to TBV this or TBV is trust but verify, by the way. Here's my theory. My theory is they put in campaign, but they didn't put in the other ones. All 3 are required. So one of them came through. Let's see if there's something else. One of them came through, but the other ones didn't. So it said not set. Let's find out. I'm just going to do content, then keyword. Not set. Yep. So I don't know.
Okay.
I would say if I was on Google's end of things, I would investigate and figure it out.
Not your account. So
yeah, not my account. But also a good example of, even though Google's demo account is there, and everybody has access to this, by the way, Google demo, you just Google the Google demo account, you can get access to it. And I would use it to play around with stuff, but do not use it as an example. Like, it's not like, here's the thing you need to, aspire to be, because it's not at all set up correctly.
Right.
But it's useful for data, playing with reports, getting used to stuff. So, but it is a good question, because that would be something, if that was me, I would totally investigate.
I will link to that with the recording in the members area.
Perfect. All right. So that's sort of the overall source, where the users are coming from. Again, are they coming from search? You've got search reports to figure out that stuff. If they're coming from Google Ads, you've got Google Ads version of coming from stuff. But source medium is the ultimate version of all of that. Now, the third sort of category of questions will be some version of what actions are they taking? Okay, so what actual actions are they taking? This could be page views. It could ultimately be button clicks, right? Things along those lines. So it depends upon what the analytics is set up to track as to what that'll do. But in this case, jump into analytics, the reports that you're looking for are the behavior reports. Okay, so it's just the actions of the users, right? So here, audience reports, who they are, acquisition, where they're coming from, behavior, what actions are they taking? In particular, you've got all pages, which is every single page it's ever seen, ever measured from Google Analytics. Then you've got landing pages, which is the first pages that people are seeing. You've got exit pages, which is the last pages they see in their sessions or in their visits. So these are some of the more useful reports. And again, I say they're useful here because you can go to the landing page and you can see the result of sessions that came in through that particular landing page. So this is a different way for you to kind of figure out what that story is. So, okay, what are the actions? And then ultimately the results that come through all in one little report, very similar to the source medium report. But the other thing that needs to be set up, and this is a 100% customized, right? Analytics doesn't do this on its own. It needs something to do this, but you can do things like events. And events, especially if you combine it with Google Tag Manager, which will be beyond the scope of this training, but it's a super useful tool. With Tag Manager, you can pass through events and you can start seeing different events. Like in this case, they've got enhanced e-commerce events or a contact us form that was filled out, and they can push that in. So anything that's a measurable behavior, you can pass through as an event to Google Analytics. By default, it's going to do page views just fine for the most part, but otherwise you can use events. And so if there's not something that's being measured, maybe it's a contact form or some sort of cart submit where they don't go to another page, like a contact form 7 in WordPress doesn't do another page. It just says, thanks, your thing's been submitted. You can use Tag Manager to figure that stuff out and pass it through this event. So you can still see the actions that people are taking here. So again, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on that gosh, it was a few years ago now, but you completely changed my thinking around events. So I know we're going to get to goals and goal setup later, but just for the audience, events can be turned into goals, but you don't have to turn events into goals. And Chris showed me years ago about this site, but basically they started by just tracking everything as events, because if you don't manually set that up, you don't have the data. But once that's set up, super useful, then loads of data is in here. Then you come in with various questions, find the information, go take actions. Some of those you may go on and turn, oh, this is a really useful event. I will turn it into a goal so that it shows up in other reports. But there were heaps of different things that you were turning into events. And it was just so impressive, completely changed the way I thought about using events.
I'll show you. This is kind of an example. This is our actual site. So you can see our events that have come through here. So we've got engagement events. We've got pipeline where I'm tracking through the sales pipeline of the customer journey. Click report, which is just basically any click that's ever happening. I've got in there so I can see the different clicks that are happening if they become a lead or a purchase. So there's lots of cool things that you can get from events. And again, very, very specific behaviors. Like in this case, this is the engagement report. What kind of things are people engaging with? Well, I've got scroll, I've got video interactions, right? So I'm measuring that sort of stuff in this particular report. And then I can drill down and say, okay, well, how far down did they scroll? And then I've got my labels down. And of course, I can, come in by page, which is how you would do that. You would typically go to events, then you go to your pages, find the page you're interested in. Let's say this case is like our free resources page. So I click on that and I can say, well, what's happening on that free resource page? Besides the fact that they saw it, which is something, what's happening? Well, they're engaging. It's triggering pipeline events. I've got a click report of buttons. And I can start to say, okay, well, I know roughly what that page looks like and how long it is. How far down are they scrolling? There is no video. That's why video doesn't show up. And I can automatically get a thing here. I'm just going to rank it by unique events. And I can see just kind of, this gives me an idea of what the most important parts are pretty quickly. Right. So the 10 and 90, everybody hits, but here's where the sort of the meat is, kind of where these events are hitting in. So this gives you some interesting details as they're coming through. So it's another level to be able to analyze and figure out the story. And that's all you're trying to do is figure out what the story is.
And I don't want to derail you here and take you off track. Sarah's asking, when do you use events versus goals? Do you want to just talk about that for a minute?
Yes, and we will in the future.
Okay.
So I'm gonna postpone that because we're going to cover it. So absolutely. Yep. And it is a good question because you're right. I mean, when it comes to that, the actions are one thing, and it's useful to know actions because sometimes you want the actions available to you when you need to do some sort of analysis, when you're trying to figure out an answer to a question, and you need the information, right, to figure out what those answers are, and you have that information. So, for example, I've got a sales page. It's got, and I'll just give a kind of a generic example. Let's say the sales page has 3 different button clicks, and for some reason you want to know which button click they're clicking on. So if you're setting up your measurement, you can answer that. That would all be tracked in Google Analytics with an event. You don't necessarily need all 3 of those to be set up as an individual goal, but you can go back there and you can see it was a button 1, button 2, or button 3 that was clicked on. That's information that's sitting there, that's stored there for you, but you wouldn't necessarily have to make it a goal because you only need it when you have that question, right? Not all the time. Right. So this is kind of a rough example of it. And then, but ultimately, when it comes to the idea of do you make it a goal, it's when you start to answer this question, which is what are the results of my user's actions? And that's kind of the 4th question that you'll ask, right? So if you're trying to track it as a result, like a desired result, right? Not a, oh, hey, what kind of happened? But here's what I want to happen. Did it happen? That's what the results are all about, right? Here's what I expect. I expect them to be a lead, or I wanted them to click on this button. So I made it a goal and measured it. That's sort of how that works. And in Google Analytics, it's the conversions reports that do all of that. So I'm going to focus on two of them, two main areas, and we'll come back to some other ones. But the first is in the goals report. And this is, of course, you have to set up goals, which we'll talk about. But when you set up goals, you will have a goal completion location. Now, this is great for questions like which blog post caused the actual lead to happen. So if you're sending traffic to a blog post, maybe you've got a content marketing play, and your traffic source at that time isn't designed to cause the sale, even though maybe it accidentally will later on if they stay in that same session for long enough. But really, it's designed to get them to engage with the content and become a lead. So you can measure for that. And then you can start to see, hey, the goal completion, it's like, here are the 7 blog posts that are really cracking in leads. And you can see that. That's what this report does.
I just want to point out, before you change that screen, I just want to point out to everybody how beautifully organized your shit is. All of your landing pages, nicely, all of your thank you pages.
I am all about URL structure.
At a glance, it's just like, this is like, take note, peeps, take note.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it makes it easier because I can go to Google Analytics. It totally set a goal whenever somebody hits a TY page. That's why we do it like that.
And we can all understand, looking at that at a glance, we don't need to look at your naming convention sheet, which is buried in Google Drive somewhere. It's just, you can tell at a glance what that means. It's great.
Exactly right. Yep. So the next thing that's kind of the question is like, okay, well, yeah, that maybe they achieved the goal at free resources, but where were they before that, right? Everybody wants to know that. Yeah, of course because sometimes you'll set a goal that what they call a destination goal, which I'll show you in a moment, where it's based on the URL. So if they land on this thank you page, like say, for example, like the destination goal will always be the goal completion location because that's what was designed to fire the goal. And you're like, all right, well, yeah, what were they before that? And so what's cool about analytics is it automatically, and this is like one of the most underused reports I think that's out there because people just don't know it's here, is the goal, the reverse goal path, which is, okay, here is the goal completion location. Here is the step before that. Here is the step before that. Here is the step before that. It actually goes 3 steps deep. And so you can see in this example, not set just means there was no data. There was no steps. Here, there were some entrances, right, where they came in. And here's like, okay, in this case, they saw the free resources page and they completed a goal there. But before that, they were on my homepage. Before that, they had just entered on the homepage. That's all this says, is the entrance. Here, they went directly to the page as an entrance. Here, again, they went to the Academy sales page, but they came in from the homepage. So, but I can get a really good idea of what the story is. Here was they achieved the goal of joining Workshop Wednesday, but here they were on the Workshop Wednesday sales page, which they came to directly before doing that. So you can kind of get an idea of what the path is that people are likely to take. Now, keep in mind, I am not coming into this report to poke around, and I want to emphasize this because this is where GA smacks you around. If I come back in here to say, well, gee, I wonder what path people are going down. Let me just see out of the 63 different options I have down here, right? That's where you get information overwhelm and you're like, this is all really cool and I have no idea what to do with it. And if you've ever ended up in that spot where you go, this is great, but I've got no idea what to do with it. And that's your phrase. That's the trigger phrase. When you say to yourself, I've got no idea what to do with this, that is because you went in unarmed, right? You didn't have a question in mind. You didn't know the information you were looking for. And more importantly, you didn't know the actions you were going to take because you didn't role play the report. So you come in and I would say, okay, I believe people are coming in from the free resources page and then most of them are coming from the homepage. Is that true? And if it is, then I'm going to send a lot more traffic to the measurement marketing page. But if they're just achieving the goals based on going directly to the landing page and making this the first page they see, then I'm going to change my traffic and I'm going to start linking more directly to the free resources page on its own because it's good enough to stand on its own. Those are the actions I'm going to take. Then I come into this report and find out what the story is. Right? So now the report's useful for me. And it's not providing information, it's telling me what to do next. So nice. Big difference in shift of how you use the tools. And it's subtle, but it gives you totally different results.
Yep.
All right. So that's reverse goal path. A couple of things I wanted to show you before we move on here is e-commerce. Now, this is way beyond the scope in terms of like how to set this up, obviously, but e-commerce, you have 2 different e-commerce reports. So here's ours. We use what they call standard e-commerce. And so if you see this where it's overview and product purchase and sales performance and these reports, this is what they call standard. There's nothing wrong with standard. Standard just shows you what was purchased, but it doesn't go into the details of how it was purchased. And we are fine with that because we measure that other ways. So if you're in with a client site and you see this, it's cool. They're just measuring, this. But if they come back to you and they say, well, we saw these reports where it has checkout steps and shopping behavior, that is something called enhanced e-commerce, which is what Google Analytics actually does use, Google Merchandise Store uses. So, right there. Here we go. A little different. You got shopping behavior, checkout behavior. Now, what's cool about this, it still shows you the, product performance right there. It still shows you things like products that were sold, but it can do a little more. It can tell you a little bit more about the journey of how they got there. And so you see things like shopping behavior, which is here's how many sessions you had. Here's how many of those had product views. Here's how many of those added to cart. Here's how many of those started a checkout. Here's how many of those finished. And you kind of get an idea of what the flow is. Then you can deep dive into the checkout because everyone's got multiple checkout. And you can actually, this part you can customize and say, well, my checkout is 2 steps. Their checkout in this case was 3 steps. So they had, billing and shipping, payment, review. Here, if I was Google, I'd be like, wow, guys, I think we have a problem, right? We got 151 people that made it through giving us the address. Then they were like, oh, pay for it? Never mind, right? Because only 9 of them made it to the review stage. So there's an issue there. And then again, things like this could be caused by just a cart abandonment campaign or something like that. It's kicking people back in. So there's
dive back to the shopping one as well, because I just want to, particularly for the agency savvy audience, we use remarketing a lot, obviously. Just want to point out the ease of creating a remarketing audience from this report.
Yep.
Just being able to click on one of those segments and turn that into a list. Yep. Basically one click. Super, super useful.
Yep. That's all with uses the segmentation up here. So you can create a segment of anything. And a lot of these reports, like Mike was saying, just come in here, click what you want. It's like, great, here's what I want. I'm going to enable the segment. Once you've got the segment, you can create the audience from it. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Beyond the scope of today's call, I know, but just
but super, super, super useful. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially with remarketing. Because that's the challenge. I think it's dying off, which is good. But it's a long, slow death because everyone still tries to get the sale on the first ad. I think and there's you can't do that. The best campaigns that are out there are not designed to make the sale. They're designed to make a bunch of sales, right? Including like, hey, I exist. Do you agree I exist? Yes. Sale made, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm worth talking to. Do you agree I'm worth talking to? Yes. Sale made, right? Now let's talk about the next sale. Like, hey, I'm worth you giving my email address to me. Is that true? Yes. Great. Sale made, and then you move them through the pipeline up to, hey, this is worth $100. Can you give me your credit card? You're like, sure. Okay, great. Sale made, and absolutely this comes into play with that. Cool. All right. So those are the 2 different types of e-commerce reports that we talked about there. So again, in this sort of main section, covering quickly kind of what happened here. So the audience reports answer the who. We talked about things like gender and age, the in-market segments, and other interest segments you can pull up. Also mobile device details, countless other things are back there. Then we talked about the where, which is the acquisition report. So if your question is around where are they coming from, this is my favorite report. As Mike said, it's the first thing he goes to. I think it should be your first thing because it's the only thing that shows you everything. It's the only thing that shows you everything. And when you set up things properly, it will show you even more than you think it can, which we will talk about in just a moment here. And then, of course, you've got behavior reports all about the actions. So that's the actions you're actually taking. Things like, hey, what pages did they land on first? What pages actually caused them to leave? And when you're back here and you're looking at the reports, sometimes what is the simplest question to ask is the most powerful, which is, does this make sense? Like if you look at this screenshot, it shows, measuremarketing.io is the homepage, but causing a bunch of exits. Does it make sense? Like, sure, that could make sense, right? Would it be like if 100% of them left to that page? No, it wouldn't make sense at all. But 40% leave, sure. They come in, they poke around, they leave. Okay, no problem. But if a page is not designed to be an abandoned page, but like if, for example, my cart page was up here on the top of the list, that would be a problem because that sure shouldn't be an exit page, not at least at a high traffic level. Then you've got conversions, which is the results, right? Answering questions around results. We talked about things like goals, the goal URLs, and then we level it up by saying, yes, but you can see what happened before that, and even before that, right? Going 3 steps deep. So you can get a better idea of what the path is that led to the goal actually being achieved with that whole concept of you're trying to figure out the story, right? You're trying to read the story that Google Analytics wants to tell you. Then, of course, we talked about the e-commerce. Two different types of e-commerce reports. They are totally different. You will never see them both in the same spot, right? There are only going to be one or the other. But again, standard just sort of answers what was sold. And then the enhanced e-commerce talks about not only what was sold, but also sort of how it was sold. Doesn't mean you can't find out the how in the standard version. You just got to measure it a different way. That's all.